I'm Carrie Watts. I am host of the Saved and Strong podcast, but I'm also an author, a speaker, not just a podcast host. But I love to help writers get their journals and prayers and notes into a book. I have a free resource called Start Writing Workbook. It'll be in the show notes, the link, as well as my email address, carrie@carriewatts.com. Let me know if you would like an appointment. I would love to hear your story. Let's just get on the phone and talk or on Zoom for 30 minutes. And let's get a strategy. Let's get a plan because your story matters. Enjoy the podcast.
Do you like testimonies of overcoming? Saved and Strong shares stories of people who have overcome struggles to find strength. Each episode inspires resilience, hope, and faith, reminding listeners they're not alone.
I'm here today with Trey Carroll, nexttestadvantage.com.
Hey, Carrie. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Tell us more about what you do and how it can help our students.
Well, Carrie, I, for 6 years, have been working with high school and college students. And what I've learned working with over 1,000 students is there's a lot of anxiety over the future, primarily with what do I do with my life? What's my career going to be? What am I good at? And so that's my job. I work with students and obviously parents, and I help ease that anxiety. I use an assessment to help them figure out how they're wired and how that pertains to work. And then I help them know, okay, I'm wired this way. What do I do next? How do I apply that into the real world? And that has been my job for the last 6 years.
How did you find your niche in your career?
Great question. Carrie, I had a stroke when I was 28, and that's how I ended up doing this work. And so while I was trying to recover, I had just previously worked with a career coach to help me understand me better and how that pertains to work and how God has wired me professionally. And I brought my results back out as I was recovering, and it dawned on me, I wish I had this information when I was 18. That would have really changed how I used college and, my early 20s, professionally speaking. And that's when the idea kind of popped in my head. Well, I wonder what 18-year-olds are doing now. I wonder how they're figuring out their calling. And one thing led to another, and that was 6 years ago. So that's how I found my niche. It was something very unexpected.
Taking this assessment and counseling with Trey will help widen their vision of the opportunities that are available. What would you add to that?
Students, they don't want to choose the wrong thing. And they think that, at 18 years old, 20 years old, if they don't choose right, well, then they've messed up their future. And so I combat a lot of that, and I help them see, hey, this is the way God has wired you. And we can do so many different things, jobs, careers, based on your interest and skills or, personality.
Give us like your top reasons why they need Next Test Advantage.
The number one reason why they need me is they need to hear somebody other than their mother or father show them you're talented. Show them, hey, your interest in fill in the blank is not by accident. That actually ties into a career. Parents, y'all are telling them the right stuff and giving them really good direction. For some reason, they listen to me and they think I'm a guru. Number two is there is a system, there is a way to narrow down all of the things out there. It's been helping take what seems like chaos out there and make it a step-by-step system to find work that's exciting, to find opportunities that are exciting. That would be number two, is trying to bring some order to the chaos. The number three reason is I know college catalogs better than I know English. And so the second I see somebody wired for something, I immediately know how to attach that to a specific major, to specific classes. I've gotten too good at knowing how to boil things down into a major. Number four is a little intentionality up front as they're getting ready to go to college can save a whole lot of money. Because when you change your major, it's liable to cost more money. And so that would be four. A little bit can go a long way in saving actual dollar bills.
There you have it, listeners. Go to nexttestadvantage.com and let Trey start helping your student find their major today. Hi, this is Carrie Watts with the Saved and Strong podcast. I'm here today with author and friend Jackie Baker. Jackie, I'm so glad you're here today.
Well, thank you for having me on your show.
Jackie's book is coming out in June. Her book is called Messy Mourning: Hope for the Mothers Grieving the Loss of a Child by Suicide. You can find out more about Jackie on her website. It's JackieMBaker.com. And Jackie, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
She is a nurse practitioner, now an author and storyteller, and she's writing about grief, faith, womanhood, identity, and the complicated work of healing. So tell us a little bit more about your book launch. I know here on your website it says to sign up to pre-order and to get the pre-order bonus. So tell us more
Yes.
about that.
Well, so I just found out yesterday that it's on Amazon for pre-orders. I'm very excited, and I have a whole bunch of friends that have already ordered the book. So that was very exciting. So the book comes out July 9th. You'll be able to get it. But right now, pre-orders are for her hard copies and paperback books are now available. And for those that pre-order before the book launch, I have a book bundle companion guide. I have a chapter by chapter companion guide that goes with every chapter in the book so that you can, as you're going through the book or someone else is going through it, they can read it at their own pace. And then there's questions and thought processes as you're reading the book. Because it's not an easy book to read, but it's a needed book to read, I do to help. Also in the book bundle I have, it's called 30 Days Psalms of Lament. And during grief, the time of lament is needed. We need to lament. Our culture doesn't like when people grieve sometimes. And so, but the Bible is always talking about laments, and the Psalms are like almost half the book of Psalms are laments. So I picked 30 days, 30 Psalms of lament. And when I was in my early grief, that's all I read in the Bible was the book of Psalms. And I highlighted everything in blue. And so if you look at my early posts, it was like I was always sharing my blue highlights in the Bible and just to encourage people and to know that grief is just, it's awful. And then also included is, I'm really excited about it. It's a one pager. Things that I noticed when I was in my early grief is people don't know what to say to a mother who's lost a child to suicide. And so I have a handout, things that you can say, things that are helpful, and things not to say. I have a Spotify listening guide that my daughter actually put together. And so, and that is just some songs of worship. After my son died, Sebastian, my daughter Isabel had this 6-hour Spotify playlist that she called Sebastian Songs. And so it's, all these songs that reminded her of her brother. And so those are the pieces for the pre-order. So there's a lot of options for people.
So how did you go from a grieving mom to writing a book? And were there other books that you read that helped you through your grief? If there's someone listening who's lost a son or a daughter to suicide, what would you recommend to them to start their healing journey? And did that lead to this book? I guess is what I'm trying to ask.
I'll tell you the one book that I went to. So when my son was struggling, he struggled with mental illness, was diagnosed with bipolar, ended up in a rehab center for a while when he had his first suicide attempt. And then 6 months later, he was successful when he died by suicide. But during that time, I came upon a book by Tim Keller called Walking with Jesus Through Pain and Suffering. And so when my son was going through all these struggles, that was the best book I could have read. I loved that book. I loved Tim Keller, the way he talked about the sufferings of Jonah and Jeremiah and Jesus, but it was practical and that how in the United States, we just don't know how to grieve. Other cultures grieve differently, and they're more accepting of those in grief. And I loved what he said was, if you're going through grief, go to section 2, because the first section is talking about the history of grief and how different cultures grieve and how Americans grieve, the Western cultures grieve. And so that became my book that I gave to every mom. And so when I always called it my Amazon speed dial. So I would just buy 4 copies of it. And I'm like, oh, here, this is the book you got to read and start in section 2. And I would tell them, this is where you have to start. And then after my son died, I went back to that book and I think I read it like 3 times. And there were other books that people had given me and they were okay, but I needed something more. I wanted a faith-based book, but I didn't want a cutesy, God is good and he is good. And that if you just do these things, you're going to get better because I realized it's not that way. And I noticed with suicide grief, it was so different. I mean, I had lost my mother when I was 18. I lost my brother. I had a lot of different grief in my life. So I've gone through a lot of grief. Then after I lost my son, I didn't know how to do it anymore. And so that's when I started writing. And of course, I went through a crisis of faith because I had just finished my doctorate as a nurse practitioner. So I was done doing that. And I had just started my new job as a pediatric nurse practitioner when my son died. And I didn't know what to do. So I'm very much a starter. I like to start things. And all of a sudden I didn't know what to do. I didn't have anything to do after my son died. My husband was starting a new business and that kept him busy. My daughter got married 6 months after her brother died. And then I went through this. I lost both my children in 6 months. And I just talked about empty nest syndrome by trial by fire. And then, so that's when I started writing because I didn't know what to do. And I signed up for a nonfiction writing class online. And, uh, and I took 16 classes and just wrote and wrote and wrote. And it was really good. So I was like 300 words a day. And I love a checklist. And so I could do that and then you turn in 1,000 at the end of the week. And so I did that for 16 classes. And I would write about my son. I kind of journaled with him, but I was writing a memoir. And then once I finished the memoir in probably about 2.5 years, I had a writing coach and she said, that's great. This book is, the memoir is great. Now it's time to write this book, the book that I've just finished. She said, this was preparing you to write this book. And then because of all my journals and stuff that I had been writing, I had a lot of material to put into the book that I currently wrote. And if that answers all that.
That's a great story. I too wrote my memoir, but I made a book deal with God. I told him I was never going to publish it. But that was just between he and I to remember what
Yeah.
all he had brought me through. And I laughed and I cried and I enjoyed the process. It was very therapeutic for me.
Hmm.
But that's when I joined Hope Writers and realized, oh, my ideal reader is reading fiction. She's not reading a 50-year-old's
Mm-hmm.
memoir, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so then I had to go back to the drawing board and learn how to write fiction. But enough about me. I love that story because we do have that in common that it does help to write your story. And what I want our
Mm-hmm.
listener to hear is Jackie and I use the same publisher, Hope Books Publishing. And Hope Writers is run by the same founding Brian Dixon. And
Mm-hmm.
Brian says there's 12 steps, there's 12 stages to writing. And the first 5 are before you publish a book. And stage 1 is writing your own story. Whether
Mm-hmm.
you're ever going to publish it or not, get it out because
Mm-hmm.
it's taking up room in your mind and your heart. And then when you get that out on paper or you type it out, I am a big believer in pen because I feel like there's that head, heart, hand connection that is
Mm-hmm.
that that helps us move along in our healing journey.
Mm-hmm.
But I do feel like that made room for me then to be more creative. And
Totally.
so, yeah.
Yeah. Mhm. I know my memoir it's about different topics than this, but I mean, they all they're interspersed. And one day I'm going to write that story as well. I mean, it's written as I gave, and this is just a side note, I gave 2 babies up for adoption because of my choice. And so, but there's redemption in that. I've met both my daughters and the story, how God brought me through that is a great story, but it wasn't right. It wasn't the time to tell that story yet.
Mhm.
Now, as I'm getting to know my daughters. So, I was like, okay, it's time, but but it just was a great preparation for how to write creative nonfiction. And so this book I took a lot of those like you would write a fiction book and put it into a nonfiction story because I love telling stories, and it's so fun to weave the stories into my academic side, so I can write a paper, but then to write a story, it's a different way of looking at it. And it
Yeah.
was so much fun to have that freedom to write the story that I felt compelled to write instead of what the academia was telling me to write. So
Tell us more about Sebastian. Tell us about his life. And, we want to remember him. And I'm
mhm,
sure that's one of the main reason you wrote this book, but I don't want to put words in your mouth. So tell us
mhm,
about Sebastian and why is it important to have this book? Our listener is probably listening thinking, what sets your book apart from, say, like Tim Keller's book that you enjoyed so
mm,
much?
mhm, mhm. Well, I one of the chapters is called More Than a Statistic, and because when Sebastian died by suicide, all of a sudden that's what he was known for is my son Sebastian who died by suicide. And I kept going, but he's more than just someone who died by suicide. I mean, my firstborn, son who was, and I write all about him in this one chapter. He was, I call just the an intelligent, precocious little boy who asked so many questions. He was walking by the time he was 10 months, running at 11 months, climbing everything. He was a national chess champion when he was in third grade. So his little brain I was shocked. I remember being in Nashville and he won all 7 games in his one section. I'm like, what? So that's the way his mind was. He was. He also played, he played soccer. He was a goalkeeper, he was a keeper all the way through to college. He just loved animals and hiking and the outdoors. I just remember one of my favorite stories is we were reading a book and he was like, well, where's the door? And we were looking at a book on anatomy. Since my husband and I are both medical, we have anatomy books for kids. And he's like, well, where's the door? And we're looking at the heart. And I'm like, well, there's the chambers. He goes, no, the door of my heart when I let Jesus in. And I'm like, yeah. I go, well, there's 4 doors. And so we were talking about it. But so that's, his heart was already very open to Jesus. And we were very much in the scriptures that we clung to was that when we walk along the road and we walk along in Deuteronomy, and we just wanted to be very intentional about how we raised our children. It was always about Jesus and always about how do we live our life for Christ. And one of my other favorite stories about Sebastian is he was like, Mom, I think he was like 8 years old. He goes, I understand God the Father and I understand Jesus, but I can't figure out the Holy Spirit. And this is an 8-year-old, right? And then a few minutes later, he comes up to me, and I don't know if you know, they're called hand clappers. They're like these little things, and they're 3 hands. And he goes, Mom, this is the Trinity, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And I thought, what a great, he's trying to figure it out. But that was his mind, he was, he was just a brilliant man who thought beyond his years. And so we always, our goal in life is if we didn't keep him busy, he was going to keep us busy. And so, but we sat and did a lot of baseball with him, did a lot of soccer. He played football. He was just played the piano when he wanted to. Was a tuba player. So he did all these great things and fun things too. And he struggled. He painted in the end of his life, but he knew we loved him. And we loved him. And he was so close to his sister. He and his sister were they're like 2 years apart. We always said we were amazed that she made it to adulthood because of her brother always pushing her over, stuff like that. But they were very close. But that's all about Sebastian, And then he went away to college, and then we noticed things changing, and he was struggling with mental health and addictions, and he made some poor choices and ended up in rehab. But we tried to help him through that. It just always was there for him. And but sometimes we always said his mind was his biggest asset, but also his greatest enemy. And you know, and that he just couldn't. He just said, "I can't stop the thoughts in my head." And but we did everything we could, and then the last day of his life, we were talking on the phone, and he told me he loved me, and I told him I loved him. And I'm just glad that those were the last words that we said to each other, not knowing that, a few hours later we were going to the police were going to come to our door and say that our son had died. But yeah, but that's Sebastian. He was a quirky young man. He was too good looking for his own good. He had we called it his blue steel look. If you're familiar with Zoolander, it was a movie, and he always, would sit in the mirror and, yeah,
Mm.
and practice his look. I have lots of pictures of, you know, early
Mhm.
photos when we had of him practicing his modeling look. Yeah, he always wanted to be a model, but he was too short.
Yeah,
But
yeah. Well, May is Mental Health Awareness Month, so I think
mm,
this is a
hmm
great time for your book to come
hmm
out, and I think it's a great time for your podcast to come out. I have my oldest brother passed away almost 22 years ago. It's been 22 years ago of a drug overdose, and he too was very talented. He was very left brain, right back brain,
hmm
intelligent in school and at the arts, but he too struggled with addictions. And so, I know when he passed away, my parents went through that same, grieving process. I don't remember them ever reading a book on grief. I think it would have been good for them.
hmm
But they have both since passed away as well. But it was hard as the youngest child to watch that.
hmm
It is difficult. So I can definitely understand your daughter's point of view. Is it's hard to grieve it as a sibling as well. So
hmm
I think your book will help a lot of people, not just parents, but siblings, aunts, uncles. Everybody in the family, right?
Yeah, there's a chapter called "Grief Would Be Easier If It Was Just Me." I say that, it's just rhetorical, but if because I had my husband grieve differently and my daughter grieve differently. And how do you maintain your own grief while others are grieving around you? And so we found the balance, but it was hard because there were days I'm like, how do I deal with my daughter? How do I deal with my husband when I am going through this? And they were all feeling the same way, and it was amazing how we all just did it differently. For example, when we were cleaning out my son's room, my thought was, I just want to get it all done, put it all away, pack it away. My husband didn't want to look at it. He's just like, we'll just leave it there. And then my daughter just wanted to wear all of her brother's clothes. And so
Mm.
you can see that's just a classic picture of just,
Yeah, yeah. And I like what you pointed to at the very beginning is that in our culture in the United States of America, we don't grieve like other cultures. And bring us into that a little bit. And then at two, then you have the whole level of being a Christian. And although we know they're in heaven, we know we'll get to see them again. We know they knew Jesus. And that does give us some comfort. Tell us about the grief process, just how you handle that is feeling like maybe you were squelched in your grief process and also encouraged in your grief process.
Wow. Yes, that's a great question. I can still remember the feelings of that early grief. I was numb, if that's a feeling, but to me, that was very, very numb. Looking back on it, it's like I have no memory of the first few months of, I don't remember. I remember my body being at the memorial service. I don't remember who was there. My husband remembers everybody who was there. Uh, but I remember I was told, I knew people came to the house, but I don't remember who they were, and my husband remembered who they were. I just remember just crying all the time. I'm not a crier. And so to allow myself to cry was really hard. And so I came to the realization in my grief that is like, oh, you know what? This is my season of crying. It talks about, in Ecclesiastes, it's a time for all these different things, a time for mourning. And I just went, this is a time of crying. And that's what I just started telling people. This is my season for crying because people are uncomfortable with tears, even, even in the Christian faith, they're uncomfortable. So I cried probably like 3 years, a lot. And it was okay. I became comfortable with it, even though other people didn't feel comfortable with it. I withdrew from it's funny, I did withdraw, which is not recommended, but I needed to take a break. I didn't, I wouldn't go to our small group anymore. In fact, I never went back to our small group, even though they were so loving and wanting. I just couldn't face people at that time. And then at church, uh, I knew I needed to go to church. I didn't want to go to church, but my husband and I, we just need to go to church. So we attend a very large church with multiple services. And so we went to the earliest service, the 8 o'clock service. Nobody knew me there. I sat in the right front row. It was dark. I could cry as soon as the worship started, we would just cry and cry. And then I would leave after I was done. I did that for a long time, just I needed to be in God's presence, but I couldn't be around other people. And I think that is very, very common for those of grieving. And then I felt, and I know this is not unusual, but at the time I didn't understand it, the shame and guilt of having a child die by suicide. Because especially when you're a Christian, your kids are supposed to live these idyllic lives, right? They're not supposed to have any problems. And then, especially when you see all your friends talking and, they're all doing great. And my son is struggling. And it was a lot of false shame and a lot of false guilt that I think sometimes our culture puts upon us or we put upon ourselves. I have a chapter, it's called When Suicide Comes to Church. So struggling, wrestling with this issue of how the church can be helpful and how the church maybe hasn't always been helpful. And 90% I would say 95% of the people were wonderful. But there were, people that would say things and you're just like, I don't want to hear that, and it's like, how do you be gracious to someone? And it was very complex. Grief is very, very complex in those early years. My husband would tell you, and this is in the book, it's like he thought he had ruined his whole witness because when Sebastian died, and I think that's maybe that's the father part, because he struggled with, was I too hard on him? Was I too soft on him? Was I too, all these different things. And then he just thought I had ruined my witness, because my son died this way. And then when he returned back to work, all of a sudden his colleagues and they would come to him and share their stories. And he realized he had become approachable, even though he always was, but there was something about Sebastian's loss that made people come and talk to us, because they felt safe now because they're like, oh, you've been through hell. You'll understand. And we did, and we do, And so we look at that as a privilege. It's like, oh my gosh, people are going to share their stories with us, but they feel safe because some people would say, oh, it's not as bad as what you've been through. I'm like, no, it's different. You can't say it's apples and oranges, In some way we have peace because since our son struggled so much. And when we said when he died, I was like, there was a peace because I don't have to worry about him anymore. He's good, and so in a way we were a little jealous because I remember being mad at him because I was mad at Sebastian, never God, because I was mad at Sebastian for what he did to me. And it wasn't about me at all, and he couldn't help himself. And he even told me that, I just can't help it. And I'm like, I know. But at that time, so I was mad at Sebastian for a long time, but never at God,
Hmm.
But I'm not mad at Sebastian. I used to say, I'm going to hit him. I'm going to tell Jesus, move over. I'm going to hit my son.
Well, and what a freedom to be able to say exactly how you feel, you
Yeah,
know?
and to be and to do that, and that's what's so good about the laments and the Psalms, because I'm like, there's David, just crying his heart out. He's mad, he's upset, he's angry, and I'm like, we can do that too. And so and it was good to know that. I remember, yeah, with some of you can't say that to Jesus. I'm like, God knows me, Jesus knows me. I can tell him everything as long as I'm doing it to him, and praying to him. And that was with Job. Job was so different from, he was mad and angry and upset, but he was always crying out to God and having a relationship with God. And that's what we did. I have always done. I feel like, that never faltered. I always tell people I felt like I was in a dark place. I couldn't feel God's presence, but I rested on the fact that God was still there, even though I couldn't feel him. I had to keep saying that, over and over again.
Did you ever dream when you went to nursing school that you would be having to deal with the healing of the mind as much as
No, not at all. Not at all. And then as a nurse practitioner, a lot of my adolescent patients were suicidal or suicidal ideation, cutting, mental health. So I became this expert in a field I'd never expected. And then when I lost my son, all of a sudden I was like, oh, I understand moms now. I get where these moms are coming when they're bringing in their children. And and I could say, yeah, I know, I understand your fear. I know what you're going through. And they look at and then I tell them, I lost my son in this way. And we're going to do everything we can to try to help your child, get the help that they need and the support that they need to get past this season that they're in, so
And how much more can they trust you because you've been through it?
yes. Yeah.
Not just I'm the expert who studied it.
Hmm.
I've walked this road.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I know it's funny for the first few months, I couldn't see those children. Of course, in my early grief, I was afraid I was going to blurt something out inappropriate because I was so, in such a grief, such a place. And where I was working, where they were so gracious. And I'm just like, please, I cannot, no, not right now. If you want me to still work here, I have to. And it was good. Like the first year, it was great. And then, then I was there for 6 more years and then I was in a place where I could do it. Then it became I could do it very objectively, I should say, because I could separate it from my own life and deal with them and then share my story. And it was actually a really great place to be. But you're right, the mothers felt safe with me because they knew I cared about them and I cared about their child, as well.
Yeah.
Hmm.
What is the reality of your faith during that time? How did you tend to draw closer to Jesus, or did you tend to isolate yourself away from him during that time?
That's another great question. We made a conscious effort to cling to Jesus no matter what. And I'm saying my husband and I, because we talked about this a lot. I couldn't read my Bible, but I could listen to my Bible. And so, unless I could only read the Psalms, I mean, like I said, I could look at the Psalms, I couldn't read anything else. But I started listening to the Bible on my walks. I would take a walk every day with my dog and listen to the Bible every day. And I've done that now, it's 9 years. So that's part of my routine. But in the early years, and sometimes I didn't hear it, but I knew it was bathing me. I just trusted that the Holy Spirit was just going to bathe me with his words, even though my mind was somewhere else. And and so that was, I just bathed myself in God's word every day that way. So I did that. And then of course, then we went to church, made ourselves go to church. Yeah, a lot of times it was going through the motion. It was muscle memory, we called it, because we were just doing it, and we just clung to Jesus. I just had to, and my prayers were just, a lot of it was like, oh God, help me, be with me. And it was hard to pray for other people at that time, but there's seasons. I always tell people there's just seasons. Sometimes you can't. Now my season is I get to pray for other moms, and when they say, I'm like, I'm praying for them. And I do, and I let them know, and I pray for them in the morning. I send them a text. I'm like, I just want I've been praying for you. But I'm very intentional about doing that. But I think the most important thing is, even though you don't feel like being with the Lord, one, the Lord's with me, he is with us. And I have that assurance, that nothing, that did not falter. But what my husband and I discovered is, before something like this happens, you need to be grounded in the word and fellowship. And, I would hear people, like, they would say, well, I came to church and asked for help and nobody helped me. Well, how long you been coming? Oh, like a week. Well, that's because we had a fellowship uh, that we were just carried along. I always talk about how in the Bible, in the battle, and he held his hands up. And when he was tired, his friends were holding his hands up. And then when the hands were held up, then they were winning the war. And then when the hands were down, and I said, that's what I felt like, that my hands were just being held up by my friends and my family. And they just held me up because I couldn't hold it up. We had such a strong connection in our church. We'd been going there at that time like 25 years. So, and the church community just came around and just took care of us. And it was just lovely. I just felt like I was just being carried by the Spirit. Looking back, I'm so thankful for that, because couldn't function.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing our publisher does recommend is that we write from the healed side. And
Hmm.
you were writing all along, but your book tells the whole story, right?
Right.
from before to now after from the healed place, and I can
Mhm.
truly hear you speak from the healed place, and
Mhm.
so, I really appreciate you sharing your story. Is there anything that you would, like to tell our listeners to encourage them if they're in the middle of it? Because I think the middle of any tragedy or crisis is the hardest place to be.
Mhm. Well, what I have, especially for speaking from suicidal grief, is our culture. If we go back to our culture, it's like 1 year you should be done, and it's just beginning. I think the Lord allows us, keeps us numb for that first year. It's almost like a protective little bubble He keeps us in because you can't function. And then year two comes, and you all of a sudden you're more aware of your feelings, the different feelings, and it almost feels worse because it's more intense now because you have recollection of it, and it makes it worse. And then I noticed by year 5 that it was still there, but the analogy I use is like, before I was in the tsunami, it was just, and then the aftermath of the tsunami leads this detritus, and debris. And you are just wading through this debris and you don't know how to get through it. And then as you get along, then you start doggy paddling and then by year 5, now I'm breaststroking. But every once in a while, a wave comes and hits you, but you recover faster and you get back. And then I noticed year 7, and where year 7, I felt this year of jubilee that it still gives me tears because I was like, it's like the Lord was saying, yeah, now it's time to rest. I got this rest from grieving, and even though, I mean, I still, I love my son, but I feel like we have moved on and we have found our new normal and it's good. It's different. Life is different, of course, because you have that called the line of demarcation before and after. But we're not defined by that after that line of demarcation. It's just something that happened to us. It doesn't define who we are. It doesn't have to define who we are. I don't want to be the mother of a child who died by suicide. There's more than that to me. And so for moms in that middle, it's like you got to cling to Jesus. You got to know, you've got to allow yourself to walk through this, and you can only do it with Jesus. You can't do it on your own. Again, our culture wants us, to be very independent, but we can't. You cannot grieve alone like that. It's just not going to work. You're going to compromise or compensate with doing other things. Some people it's drinking, sleeping too much time on the internet or whatever, eating something, reading, checking out. But you've got to allow Jesus to work through you and be with you. And I just know it's just like, but I remember my husband and I are like, we're good. We're in
Mm,
a good place. It's a good place to be. And so looking back at my book, I share the early journal stories, and you see that raw grief in the beginning stages. And then as I move through the book, it's like, yeah, there is life after this. We can still grieve and still move on. We can move on and not forget, and through it all, that God is with us, and he has wonderful things for us. And I can honestly say that God is good and it is well with my soul. And even though this horrible thing happened to me, it's not, as long as we live on this earth, we're going to have horrible things happen to us until the day we get that ultimate, when we all die and get to go see Jesus. So we just have to cling through it all, because the longer you live, the more you're going to go through all this.
yeah.
Hopefully not like this, but
Right, right. Well,
yeah.
and you're right, and I think, yes, we've all been through hard things,
Mhm.
but not everybody chooses healing,
Right.
and a lot of people stay
Stay
in the
stuck.
they stay stuck in the grief. So I'm so
Hmm.
thankful that you and your husband were able to move on and that you've written this book, because only 5% of the people who say they're gonna write a book ever do. And
Mm.
I feel like these books and these messages, we say a lot in the writing world, our mess became our message,
Hmm.
and so our hurt became our healing
Hmm.
and our hope, and I think you're gonna give a lot of people hope who read your book.
And
So
that's what I
what's
want.
next for you? What's next on the agenda? You're gonna get this book released. Do
Mhm.
you have, speaking engagements planned or book signings?
I had my first book signing in July, so it was very exciting. And it was a sweet story, a bittersweet story, because it was actually one of my patients of all things. So one of my patients' mother owns a bookstore. And I didn't know this as during the exam, I was asking, oh, what are you going to do for the summer? And he's 16. And he's like, oh, I work for my mom. What do you do, mom? I own a bookstore. I'm like, oh, really? I said, I'm writing a book. I've written a book. So that was, and then did the exam, moved on. And then afterwards, I have like little bookmarks to give her. So I gave her one and she turns it over and she goes, my mother died by suicide when I was 8 years old. You need to come and do a book signing. She said, this area that she said the suicide rate is really high. Will you come? I'm like, yes, I will come. So I'm like, all right, Lord. Yeah. So that's the beginning. I'm just being carried, you know, by this. And I am willing to be, God's vessel with this book. And I'm really thankful about July. You talk about timing because I couldn't pick a day. I just didn't know. I didn't want to do it on the anniversary. The anniversary of we call it of my son's passing is in September. So I didn't want it in September. We always go on a trip in September. So I'm never home and that's okay. 9 years later coming up. But September is also National Suicide Prevention Month. And so I am looking at July, getting ready for September to have tools available for moms. And so I'm on a bunch of suicide survivor Facebook groups and getting ready to share that with them as well to let them know. Yeah. So that and whatever else is available. I have another podcast next week as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I
Mhm.
want our listener to hear that too, is it's a very important for us as authors to share with other people that we've written a book. And because I have had those divine appointments too, where I've told
Mhm.
somebody about my book and they're like, I need that for myself or for someone else.
Mhm.
And the Lord is so sweet to provide those opportunities to share.
Mhm. Mhm.
And the more we share, I think the more I share my story, and you feel this way as well, is we heal a little bit more. And
Yeah.
then we
Mhm.
invite other people into their healing process, whereas
Mhm.
they may have stuffed it thinking, like you say, we live in this culture where nobody's gonna let us grieve, where we have to
Mhm.
keep at the task at hand,
Mhm.
keep going forward and be successful or, you know, just the pressure to perform, right? And then you take that hour to share your story, and then they're just sitting there going, "Me too. I have that need to grieve as well."
Mhm.
So
Yeah, and we
how
all had
sweet to bring that
yeah.
into our culture that it's okay to grieve.
Mhm. Yeah, and one of the taglines that I've been thinking about for the book is, like, every child that dies by suicide has a mother, and this book is for them, Every child has a mother, and so I want every mother needs that book, my book, this book, you know?
This book that God has allowed you
Yes,
to author, right?
I know,
I
I
know if
always
you
said I
feel like
wanted to
me,
write
whenever I sit down to write and I pray, "Okay, Lord, give me the words," I feel like he's
yeah.
my co-writer.
Right, and I know what I said, I wanted to write the next Jane Austen novel, but instead the Lord wanted me to write this, and that's okay, I know I am, I was a reluctant vessel, I just kept saying, "Are you sure, Lord? Are you sure, Lord?" And, the more I'm like, "Okay, I've got it. I'm writing it." And my husband was okay with it because I wanted to make sure that my husband and my daughter were okay with me share their story as well, and they're like, "No, we need to do this."
Is their part in the book, did they help you write any of it, or they were your beta
No,
readers,
they were
or
just mostly supporters reading it. I would have them read it, very encouraging. And then when I would read stuff, they would interject stories that I didn't remember because I said I'm fuzzy on some things. And so like the opening line of the book, it just starts out with Isabel, and Isabel's like, oh, I remember that, and so because she's the one that answered the door when the knock came on the door. And that's what started the book was like, that's how my books, when I first started writing, it was like the knock at the door, the knock that nobody wants, at midnight. But yeah, so they were, and then my husband was like, oh no, don't say it that way, say it that way. So he was really good about helping me remember, because sometimes as we know, memory can be funny sometimes, what you think you remember, and what actually
Mhm.
happened. I'm like, oh, yeah, it happened like that. But yeah, but they've always been really, really supportive of it all. So,
Yeah.
and my daughter's like, anybody trolls you, I'll beat them up. I'm like, okay. So that's her role, she
No,
said.
I think you'll have a very sweet response to your book. I think, it's gonna fill a need, and I just pray that your words are sent out far and wide.
Yeah, and
And
I wanted people, and I also didn't wanna just write my story, but it's every chapter talks about the Lord, and I go back to the scripture over and over again, and I talk about stories like of Mary and Martha, and, when their brother had died, and there's like, "Lord, you could have been here," and how Jesus, and then so I talk about that story, and then I have a chapter, it's like I was remembering, it's called, Sympathy for the Mother of Judas. And it's the idea that Judas, he died by suicide. We all know that. Everybody knows that. And I'm like, but he had a mom. And so I wrote a chapter from her perspective, which was my perspective, which is every mother's perspective, of watching their son or their child, and seeing them make choices that we weren't happy with. So I bring Jesus in there a lot, every chapter. And every chapter wants to give them hope that, you can't do this without Jesus. But I have a master's in biblical studies, so I'm getting to use it. It's so much fun. So,
wow,
yeah.
that's beautiful. Do you have a support group on Facebook yourself, or you said you're part of some support
I'm
groups?
I'm part of Facebook groups. I'm also a grief share. If you're familiar with Grief Share International, it's through our church. So I'm a grief share leader. I tried to start. It was interesting when I first started writing my book and getting ready. I tried to do a suicide support group at my church. I thought because I know there's a need. One person signed up, and what I realized was it wasn't because we weren't doing the right things. It's because of the shame and the guilt and the isolation that happens with these women. And I would meet with them individually. And I did that. And I'm like, but it's really hard to get a group of people together to talk about this because of all the stigma. And I would think the church should be the safe place to do it. But there's a barrier there that I'm slowly trying to break through and just to be a voice of that. But that's the plan, is to have a support group that way. I'm actually been talking with a counseling group about the idea of doing a suicide support group there. So we'll see. Yeah, I'm open to it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
One thing at a time, right?
Right. Yes. Oh, yeah. Mhm.
My goodness, that's what I have figured out about the author life. Who knew that there was all the whole marketing piece, right?
Did not know. I said writing the book was easy in hindsight, 'Cause I'm being stretched. Like, what do you mean I have to do a media page? A kit? What do you mean I have to do this? I hired a publicist to help me. So that's going to be fun too.
Good, good. Well, I do have one little piece of advice. When you go for your book signing and you speak anywhere, ask somebody in the audience to take pictures of you, because
Okay.
it never fails. I'll leave a speaking event and I'm like, "Oh, I have no photos to prove that I did that."
Yeah. Uh-huh. Well, I
And
was
they make
wondering about.
great posts and they make great,
Oh,
on your press
yeah.
kit or and
Uh-huh.
always have somebody write a review. "Hey, will you email me a review of how I did today?" That's something else you can put
Okay.
in your press kit on your website, because people love to hear other people's reviews of not just your book, but your speaking
Mhm.
engagements and
Mhm.
all else that
I
you'll
know,
do.
I'm learning all of that. I know, I was thinking because someone was saying, "Oh, at the we're gonna have a launch party at our house," and they go, "You need to read your book," and I'm like, "I can't read my book." Because even in the early writing, whenever I would read it out loud to my husband, I cried. I always cry, and I'm like, "I don't know if I wanna," you know, it's hard. I can write it. There's something, it's detaching that way. You know what I mean? It's just, I can be really objective. But once I read it, oh my gosh, the tears just come and come. And I'm like, maybe I can have someone else read it. I'm still processing how to do that because it's just going to be, we'll just have tissues everywhere.
Yeah,
So,
just practice, because you probably will eventually do it for Audible. And it took me 12 hours to record my book for Audible. It's only a 5 hour listen. It's only 5 hours on Audible, but I had to
mhm.
stop and start over so many times because I started crying. And my book's fiction, but you can do it. You can do it,
Okay.
Jackie.
Okay. All right. I know. I'm just like,
You can do it. Well, I have absolutely loved this conversation. Jackie and I are on a 1 hour coaching call every week with our publisher. And so we really don't get time to get to know each other. So selfishly, I love these podcasts because then I get to know my author friends a lot better, and I know you so much better now. And and I could talk to you for hours, but I'm sure that our our time is up, and so I just want to give you one more opportunity just to leave our listener with any wisdom that you have from writing or living from a point of grief.
Gosh, what a great question again. I would say just don't. The one thing I learned is don't edit, just write. Don't worry about the grammar if you're writing, because I would get bogged down in the words. And even though my head was already thinking something ahead, but if you're writing I remember one of the best advice I got from one of my writing coaches, and she said, "Well, that's what editors are for." And I was like, okay, that was great. And so it just freed me up just to write, and not worry. And so I could actually get more words down, and then to go back and do that. So that was one of the things that I would think. And then writing in grief again, it's like, don't worry about who is going to read it. Just write it, because I always think if you don't vomit it out, I always talk about vomiting it out. If you don't write it out, your body is going to act it out in some way, and there is something freeing about the body memory, and your body remembers. And so if you can get it down on paper, it really does lift the physical part of grief that sometimes stays with us, if that makes sense. I still have body memories on, like the anniversary day or birthday. Sometimes I'll forget it's his birthday, and then I'm like, why am I acting? But I know, but writing just really, really helps with that so much. So that's what I would recommend it for. Even if you never publish it, and I was never a writer. I always said, I mean, I was always a writer, but I would never claim to have been a writer, but I wrote a lot. Now I'm claiming I am a writer. So,
Yes, yes. You
uh,
have to practice it in the mirror. Yes, I am a
you
writer.
do, because I've always identified I'm a nurse practitioner, I'm a nurse, I'm these things, but I'm like, I'm a writer. I guess I'm an author now. I can say that now. I'm an author.
Yes, your resume is blooming.
Yes, it's fun.
Yes, yes.
And I'm willing to do whatever God wants to do. And I have, like, 4 or 5 other books in me, but one at a time, right? Yeah.
Yeah, once you get that first or second one out, they just roll. God gave me another title for a book just last week, and I was like, "Okay, Lord, I'm gonna put it in my notes. It's in the line."
That's what I do when I'm walking. I'm like, oh, wait a minute. Oh, there's a great chapter right there. Yeah, same thing. I do that too. I just have to put it on the phone. I think that was a Brian Dixon thing. Just like, just say it. Right. Okay, yes, it's on the phone somewhere. But then I forget I have it on the phone. You know?
Yeah, yeah. Go back and look at it. It's gonna be in your book
Yes.
one day.
Yes. Mhm.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Jackie. I wanna remind our listeners, Jackie's website is Jackie M. Baker, M as in mom, and go to her website, sign up for actually, go ahead and pre-order the book, and then
Mhm.
sign up for her book launch team so you can get that book launch bundle, and follow her on social media. She's Jackie M. Baker on Instagram. Where else can we
Mhm.
follow you, Jackie?
I'm on Substack, Facebook, so all the usual places. Yeah.
All the usual places. Well, we
Mhm.
will be following you, and I'm
Okay.
just so grateful that you were able to spend time with us today. Thank you so much.
Oh, well, thank you very much for having me, Carrie. It's been a lot of fun,
Yeah. All
and
right.
you made it very easy to do. Yeah.
Good. Well, I
Okay.
love podcasting. It's one of my new favorite hobbies.
That's so good. I'm not there yet, but I like talking to people. So I'll do it on this end. Okay.
Yeah. If you ever need help, let me know.
All right. Well, thank you. Okay.
All right. Thank you. Have a good day.
Mhm.
Listeners, they're not.